This is National Library Week, so we ask that you consider including a couple hashtags as we go. First hashtag is National Library Week, and then the second hashtag is for our library here in Prince George's County, Maryland. It is Love PGCMLS. We don't think a week is enough time to celebrate all of the awesomeness that is the library community, so we do it for a whole month in April. You can also celebrate things like Earth Day, which was yesterday, the 50th anniversary, and other wonderful things throughout the month of April. But we think libraries deserve the love, especially nowadays as we are dealing with some interesting times. So welcome, welcome, welcome all. We are officially live. Yes, Shakespeare's birthday. Happy birthday, Shakespeare. Also, happy World Book Day. It is like the amount of celebrations we can have in one day are amazing. And for Shakespeare, we can thank many dramatic works that require people to wear tights, which can be good or can be bad, depending on the production. So there is that. Also, Kyla's dad's birthday. Amazing. Kyla is a wonderful colleague of ours here in Prince George's County. She works for the County Human Relations Commission, which is our county civil rights agency, which is really great. So, introductions. My name is Nick. I'm the COO for Communication and Outreach at the Prince George's County Memorial Library System outside of DC and Maryland. We serve over 915,000 amazing DMV community members with 19 branch libraries throughout the county and also some really phenomenal online resources. And I have with us today some fabulous colleagues, and we'll go around the Hollywood squares here, starting off with Lupita. And if you could all just say a bit about yourselves, where you live in the area, and what brings you to literary discussions.
Yeah, sure. So my name is Lupita, and I live and hang out in Maryland, but I also love to venture over to DC for the literary events there. And I am a Bookstagrammer. That's how I've kind of, I would say, wiggled my way into the book community in DC. And it's what I do is I share books, I review books on my platforms, which is Instagram and Twitter.
Awesome, thank you. We'll go counterclockwise. At least on my screen, you might have a different layout on yours, but Roswell and Encina.
Hi, I'm Roswell Encina. I'm the Chief Communications Officer for the Library of Congress. I'm lucky enough that we get to host many of these author events at the library, and I've had the opportunity to meet, some of my favorite authors that we've hosted at the library, from Andre Aciman to Neil Patrick Harris, and to many of our favorite LGBTQ authors and artists out there.
Awesome. Well, welcome, Roswell. We're grateful to have you here. You've been an amazing, amazing person who has worked behind the scenes and in front of the camera as well on behalf of the equity of LGBTQ representation in our federal cultural institutions. And for those of you who have seen a change at the library, Roswell is in large part the convening force behind supporting folks who are interested in adding LGBTQ programs and collections, and of course with the support of Dr. Hayden and the whole team at the library. So there are a handful of people who you can say transform American cultural memory, and Roswell has had a very direct hand in that for all of us as Americans, so it's pretty cool. And I don't get to say things like that often to him, but
we can't do it without all the folks who are joining us tonight as our great collaborators. So. Awesome.
We'll pass it on to David.
Hi there, I'm David Quick. I'm the Adult Services Coordinator at the DC Public Library. It's been fun to do all kinds of stuff with PG County over the past few weeks. I get to work on all kinds of stuff supporting adult customers for the DC Public Library around job seeking, senior services, and all kinds of stuff. But the literary angle on things is one of my favorite things that I get to work on. And so it's fun to be here tonight talking about this specific part of the literary community.
Awesome. Cool. So we'll just dive right in. Tonight is really intended to be an open-ended conversation about books that have had an impact on us as individual readers, books that are out there that we think that you all should at least take a peek at, not necessarily read if it's not your thing, but just explore more about. And we also want to answer your questions as we go. So as I mentioned, we are live on 4 platforms right now: Crowdcast, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube. Share the love with your friends and family. If you have any questions or comments, please type them into whatever platform you're watching us on, and we will make sure that those get shared with the hosts here. So if we could all do a rapid round, one after the other. When did you kind of realize that books that have specific LGBTQ plus characters or themes, or LGBTQ plus authors, were kind of their own thing or not within literature? I know that's kind of an open-ended question, but
Ladies first.
Wow. I would have to say probably not until maybe a couple of years ago. In general, I think one of the things that I'm most passionate about doing with my platforms is to be able to highlight authors of color, but also, of course, and LGBTQIA books, because I felt like growing up, I didn't have that representation in my life of either. I just kind of spent a lot of time reading what school recommended, which in our curriculum for when I was growing up, it wasn't a lot of authors of color. I think maybe I remember. No, I don't even remember reading Sandra Cisneros, but I've heard of other people that read Sandra Cisneros in high school. I think what I remember reading was like Romeo and Juliet. No offense to Shakespeare, it was great, but but it was just so I guess up until recently when I started really joining the Bookstagram and like book community, I realized that there's kind of a separation of LGBTQIA work that is underrepresented. It needs a lot more love.
awesome.
I think
I am
for
not
me,
muted.
I don't think there's been one book that made me completely realize it. I think growing up, there was always been like, I won't say it was taboo, but there was always like, oh, there's the book that has a gay character in it, and everybody's kind of shy away from reading away from it. But I think in the past maybe decade or a little bit more, LGBTQ books with a main character in it or an LGBTQ author have really kind of are in the mainstream. I know we've had this discussion before that they should not be kind of just in their own kind of division anymore, but they should just be, if it's a fiction book, it should just be fiction. It should not be the gay novel or the gay fiction book or the gay memoir or the lesbian memoir. I feel like they're becoming a little bit more mainstream. I know that we've got a long way to go, but I think it's a whole lot better for especially young adults now who have more choices out there and not to shy away from them.
Cool. Thank you. David.
I guess what comes to mind for me, think about at the time in my 20s when I come out and thinking of queer older than me who kind of took me under their wing and looked out for me and were also readers, and the authors that they introduced me to, like people like Larry Kramer or James Baldwin, where there was a sense of history and community represented by those books. And just those memories and those relationships with people reading those books stand out to me as the time when I kind of knew who the kind of the icons of LGBTQ literature were. And so those are special memories to me, and as a reader and as a queer person, for sure.
Cool, thank you. If anyone's watching on Crowdcast, if you see that a presenter's screen has gone out, it's usually a bandwidth issue, but the camera is usually still running on any of the third-party streaming. So if that happens, feel free to go check it out on a different platform. But the audio usually stays solid, so you can stay here too. So for me, I kind of think I came to LGBTQ content most immediately through TV shows, honestly. I have always been an avid reader, but the books that exist now did not exist, at least in my awareness, when I was growing up in the 90s and the early aughts. And certainly the YA books that exist now did not exist back then. And totally corny and probably filling into some stereotypes, like Will and Grace and Queer as Folk were hugely transformative in my awareness of LGBTQ culture, and that was in large part because I just didn't have any exposure to any other kind of cultural representations at that time. And then I really, with my own reading habits, things have changed a lot, but I tended to start on the nonfiction side and also with theater. I did some theater back in the day, and I have worked in music a lot. And thinking about works like the Laramie Project, which had a huge impact on my own coming out journey, which we did in high school, and studying Angels in America in college and other seminal works like that. It's really kind of started me on the journey of understanding what LGBTQ plus representation is in literature and other cultural things. But nowadays I read all kinds of fun and wacky stuff, so it is all good. So let's do this. What has been one of the most transformative LGBTQ plus directly related or adjacent themed or LGBTQ plus author books that has had an impact on you individually? For anyone who wants to take it.
Oh, wow. I guess I'll start first individually. I think I would think, and I have a copy. So, So Far From God by Ana Castillo. I feel like anyone who knows me as a book lover has heard me talk about this book. I read it when I was, I think, maybe like my teens. And so Ana Castillo is a queer Chicana writer. So I just feel like having her work at such a young age, and like it kind of being like there is one queer character, and it's like you can tell she's queer, but she doesn't really say, outright say this character is gay or any. She doesn't have a language for it that she writes in the book of the character. So just kind of having that subtle love between two women that you can feel, but you're not really sure. I guess it was for me really impactful to have that growing up, because it was at the right time. I think anything else might have been too much, and it might have freaked me out, or I might have had other issues coming into myself.
Cool. Thank you for sharing.
Mine was The Amazing Adventures of Kavalier and Clay. I mean, as a kid, I loved comic books. And I had no idea. I thought this book was just going to be about comic books and the people who wrote about it. When this book came out, it was kind of like the last thing that they wanted to promote was the big gay part of the book. And I guess, despite I was an adult by the time I read this, it really spoke to me of just, what people were struggling when they were younger and compared to what it is now. And it kind of, it had all the things that I wanted in a book, between everything I was nerding out about when it comes to comic books, to, of course, what I was going through personally. But I feel like there's always a new book that's kind of inspiring us, or we're discovering something about ourselves in each one. Of course, I always said that this was my favorite book of all time, until A Little Life came out, about 5 or 6 years ago, and I completely love this book despite how much devastating it is. But I feel like every year there's one new book that will always kind of talk to me, or I can really connect to. And last year, I think it was, I hate to have all these piles of books here, was On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous. I think as an Asian American, as an Asian American gay man in this country, there was a lot of things that you connect to and you could understand from what was going on with that family, or with that, between the dynamic of the mother and son. So I feel like there's always something new to discover, and that will kind of enlighten us in some capacity.
Cool.
Thanks.
David, any thoughts, or do you want to pass on this one?
No. But I will, since Roz brought up Michael Chabon, who I love a lot, and I think he jokes about how one of the tropes of his books is that there's always some little gay relationship in there, even though he's not a gay person himself. But I was thinking about our straight and cis siblings who do well by writing about queer people, and I'm reading a book by David Mitchell that's not out yet, Utopia Avenue, where he just takes us very seriously, and I've really appreciated that. But my book that, to answer your question, Nick, is called Lovable Oaf by Ed Luce, and it's a graphic novel about this guy, the oaf. And so, you know, I think there's a great intersection between graphic novels and queer literature that always deserves to be highlighted. And if you're looking for just a lot of fun exploration of pop culture and death metal and wrestling and kittens, this is a great one that I can keep coming back to again and again. So, and he's a lot of fun on social media at Loose.
Very cool. We have some amazing comments coming in, so I just want to catch up on some of them. Shout out to all of the colleagues at Prince George's County Memorial Library System who are tuning in. You are all fabulous. Shout out to Kyla, Douglas. Monica said, okay, now I have to read A Little Life, which is great. Kyla happened to go to high school, or was buddies with Hanya during high school, which is mind-blowing, and that's as close as she's gotten to the book High School in Hawaii. And let's see what else. Douglas said, Little Life crushed them. I was in the library parking lot about to go into work and was sobbing. Chris says, Ocean Vuong's novel and poetry is brilliant. Kyla, Death Metal and Kittens. That sounds perfect. Chris, Ed Luce, love his work, so unique and fun. And then over on Facebook, our friend Kelsey says, I am sure David Leviathan's Boy Meets Boy wasn't the first book I read with LGBT characters, but it immediately came to mind as the first I read as a teen that portrayed a gay character positively and as the center of the story. So we appreciate all of your comments. Keep them coming. Thank you, thank you, thank you. For me, I feel like my answer to this type of question changes potentially by the month, depending on what's going on. Trying to think. Honestly, for me, I think the most early revelatory thing that was happening in books was seeing in some nonfiction biographies about musicians who I've studied heavily, like Leonard Bernstein and Aaron Copland, was learning about their the role of sexuality in their lives, and there's always complications with trying to retroactively apply labels and trying to define people, but at the very least with folks like Copland and Bernstein, it's very clear, and they acknowledge that they were not necessarily on one end or the other of the spectrum of relationships and such. But seeing that these people who I had already come to admire for their accomplishments professionally and for their artistic accomplishments, I think really started to help me along the path of appreciating that this is a thing and that it's a part of our identities that can be celebrated. And sometimes it comes to the front in our identities, but most times it's just a part of what makes us all fabulous, which is really cool. So we're going to go to the question that we have here now. Will there be a list of all these titles given at the end? I'm frantically trying to write them all down, but I can't keep. But we can definitely do that for you, Cassandra, because we are library people and we are here to serve. So we will definitely do that for you. And also this video will be available on demand for everyone. And you can adjust the playback speed. So if you want to hear me speak even faster, you can experiment with that. I do not recommend it. Okay, cool. So I know I gave all of our friends some advanced questions, but advanced questions are boring. So what is a recent nonfiction book that addressed something having to do with an LGBTQ plus character or theme that you enjoyed reading or hated?
I probably can't say which book I didn't like.
I know which one it is.
I can tell you, yes. I can tell you, though, which is the complete opposite that I told you was kind of like a better version of it, is, and I can never remember the title of it. It's the pink book. Here for it. Here for it. That's what it is.
Yes, we love Here for It.
We love Here for It, and I really think it's funny, it's heartfelt, and it brings maybe one part of the LGBT community that tends to be kind of, I won't say neglected, but not really focused more on, is the African American community, and how African American community reacts to when a young man comes out or a young woman comes out. And I love how this author took approached it, and he made it funny, but it was still very genuine and mature.
Cool. I read that too and enjoyed it. Any other thoughts? Actually, I have it right.
One book that I read a preview copy of last summer is called Real Life by Brandon Taylor. And Lupita, you and I were still supposed to sit and talk about that because I know you read it too. Brandon's he was a scientist who turned towards fiction writing and wrote a book kind of about a grad student in a thinly veiled Midwestern city. It's a beautiful read. It's not fun necessarily. It's kind of a hard, sad story, but I think it takes very seriously the experience of queer people and queer people of color, and impressive to see somebody who like was not professionally a writer turn towards that. And I really recommend it. And he's, I think, going to do important things as a writer as he goes forward.
Cool.
I think a recent book that I read, Fiebre Tropical, and what makes it so unique is for me, it covers so many intersectionalities. You know, I'm an immigrant, I'm queer. It's a coming of age story. So, and it's written in like Spanish and English. So it's like a Spanglish kind of, it's just such a unique experience. And so I definitely would have to say this one. And of course, I mean, I think everyone's read this, right? In the Dreamhouse by Carmen Maria Machado.
Oh, it's on my pile. I haven't gotten to it yet.
Oh my
Chris read
God.
it.
Or I have to confess, I haven't read it yet either.
Oh my God, guys. Like, whew.
It's amazing.
It's there's just no way to describe it other than it's a memoir, but it's not like a memoir. It's creepy. It's so good. So good.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. So next question. What is a book that you have read and enjoyed or appreciated that represents a part of the LGBTQ plus community that you felt you learned a lot about in the book? Like for me, there have been a few books recently where I've learned a lot more about own voices experiences from the trans community or from immigrant LGBTQ plus experiences and things like that that I've appreciated. So just curious to hear if you have any books like that in your life.
So I can tell you, I'm listening to Redefining Realness by Janet Mock. And I feel like I'm learning so much about the trans experience that I didn't know, and just so much about how, I mean, you can be part of a community and still be so ignorant to the struggles that other members in your community are enduring. So I think that's one for me.
Cool.
I mean, mine's probably it's Sissy by Jacob Tabaya. I feel like most of us still have to be very careful, even that we are part of the LGBTQ community, of how sensitive we should be when it comes to using our pronouns. And if there's one thing I have learned so much from that book is to make sure we consider that and be very sensitive towards our brothers and sisters who are non-binary.
Cool. We have a friend here who opened up a whole wonderful thing that I would have mentioned later. So Douglas has shouted out The Editor by Stephen Rowley because he didn't know that about Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis's life as an editor and found that interesting. So that is one of my book recommendations. I'm sure Roswell's as well.
Yes,
and I know we've all had a chance to meet Stephen Rowley on this call. We are groupies, or at least two of us are, and the other two are honorary groupies, whether or not they want to be. So this is a really fabulous book. Came out last year by Stephen Rowley, who wrote Lily and the Octopus, which is also another beautiful book. That was his debut, and features a gay couple as the kind of primary characters, but it's not about that at all, and neither really is The Editor. The Editor is a really beautiful story about how an aspiring writer who's trying to come out with their first novel happens upon having Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis as his editor for the book, and the whole book becomes a kind of a reflection on relationship with your mother and the proxies of Jacqueline and the main character kind of as representing their own relationships with their families was really, really interesting. And then there was some drama, which you'll have to read about. But that's it. Yeah. Great suggestion, Douglas. Okay. How about queer books to film? Any thoughts on some goodies or some duds in that realm?
I think the beauty is, I feel like books or literature is always ahead when it comes to films and TV. I think the films that were made that were based on books are a better quality, just because I feel like they're getting better attention. This goes from Brokeback to Call Me by Your Name to even Love, Simon. I feel like it's just a major triumph, whether the movies are good or bad, as long as they're getting a lot of attention on the mainstream kind of audience. I feel like we should celebrate that. However, I could go through a whole long list of books that I want to be turned into movies. And some of them I've kind of cast in my head already. I've named all the actors I want to play, who I want to be in A Little Life, and let's just see what happens.
Mm-hmm. Any others?
So when you sent that question ahead, I couldn't think of anything. But then I'm actually fresh off watching Little Fires Everywhere, which is it's funny because in the book, and Celeste Ng, who's the author of the book, they adapted this to a limited series on Hulu. Celeste Ng had said, I did not intend for one of the characters to be queer, but like having her character come through in ways that I couldn't develop her and adapt it in this way on the screen, she just felt like that this is what the character was supposed to be all along. So I thought that was really interesting for her to say that. And then to be able to see that transition from book to screen and it just be more elevated. I don't know if you guys watched it. I really enjoyed it. I'm like,
I have just the finale left, which I'm like, I don't know how I feel about all the changes in the show from the book. As I think they definitely ramped up some of the drama, which I think changed some of the thoughtfulness that Celeste had intended in the reading of it, at least from the way I read it. But it is definitely fascinating. Sometimes it's a little slow paced, like there's like these long drawn out scenes of heads turning and pondering, and I'm just like, I don't have time for this. Just like keep it going with the drama, but it's good.
You don't have time for this? What else are we doing? No kidding.
No, I'm working. That's all I've got going on. I'm just like, jeez. But it's good. Any others?
I tried to think of one, and I just kept coming back to all the bad adaptations, and I don't know. I need to sit and think about it some more. But I was thinking about stuff like Breakfast at Tiffany's, where they kind of write the gay people out of it, and
that movie has a lot more other issues aside from that.
yes, a lot.
But it's it is an iconic movie, and yes, it does have some issues that probably won't pass nowadays.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely, that's just one example.
So I have a couple questions to provoke some, hopefully, differing opinions on things. But the first is, at least in my observation, and probably folks would agree, it seems to be like the way that LGBTQ culture has been normalized into kind of more mainstream culture. It always seems to start off with the white gay male experience by a white gay male author, usually of a certain age, from certain kind of socioeconomic level and that kind of thing. And that seems to be loosening up a bit now, but it feels like there's been 2 decades basically where it took, a certain type of thing being accepted as the representation of a whole culture where it wasn't that. And now even that we have Pose, and we've had many other things along the way that represent other parts of the LGBTQ plus community, but Pose also should not be held up as a monolithic thing, because ball culture is not trans culture, but that's some of the messaging that's being taken out of that by some people, which is totally wrong. So eager to hear your thoughts on that prompt.
I think most of it, I really think Hollywood's just been called out on it. Aside from the fact we've all been asking for this for the long time. And I think this is where really, when loud voices really make a difference. And I think it is up to the community now to allow us to portray LGBTQ characters that are not stereotypical and try to show more depth, and to make sure it's just not, just another white man portraying another, I hate to say it, white gay man story, but trying to put more depth into it, and, making sure there's a trans character, or, an Asian or a female Asian lesbian. So I feel like it's about time. We've got such a long way to go, considering that there's so much, as we've all mentioned, there's a lot of books that they could base this all from. And I think it's just about time they start pulling it from some good sources.
Anyone else want to step into it?
No, I think you covered it so well. I think you covered it so well. I think that we can't accept representation for the sake of representation. I think that we're at a period now where we need to make sure that the way that these characters are being represented is everybody. It's not a stereotype. I think we're at a time where we can move away from that.
You brought up red, white, and royal blue there. And I also think, despite, I hope I'm not giving it away because many people have seen the movie, just what Becky Albertalli's done with her characters with Love, Simon. And it's set in the South. She's really portraying that, it's a very diverse group of teenagers coming together. And, just the last scene in Simon, who he finds out who is the secret admirer, just puts some major diversity when it comes to the interaction of these teens. If you compare it to teenage movies from the 80s, when everybody, like from The Breakfast Club or 16 Candles, there's no other representation there aside, from a suburban white family or families.
Yeah, one of the things that I I loved the Love, Simon movie, and I really, really enjoyed the book, and I wish we had more books like that when I was a teenager, because that would have been like mind-blowing. But on the flip side of that film, and more so in the film than in the book, the way that the family was kind of portrayed, it was kind of like Leave It to Beavers of white people in the South, and then it like tried to be a little diverse in other ways, which kind of plays back into that same thing of like there's a progression of normalization of certain topics and representation that happens, likely for commercial reasons, I think, or maybe it's totally not intentional and it's just as a result of casting and stuff. And it doesn't, like for me, I try not to let it detract from the my enjoyment of the film or the book, but it's something like in the reflection afterwards where it definitely comes to mind a bit. We had a question on Facebook from Kelsey, built in with a comment. Kelsey says, I've noticed a recent uptick in stories that tackle LGBTQ plus identity and religion, which was definitely needed. Do you have any thoughts about other types of stories, experiences within the LGBTQ plus community that you'd like to see told more often?
I think when it comes to most books, it always either ties it up very nicely or it just becomes very devastating in the end. Sometimes there's just no good medium here. There's a lot of maybe certain issues that most LGBTQ folks deal with, and I feel like they should deal with them strong. Just from loneliness to I could somewhat relate to this, and I think some episodes of Queer Eye address to it, when just the rejection and harshness of that most LGBTQ folks deal with. And they always make it sound like, oh, it's just so easy to find someone to date or hook up with. But I guess in some reality, for a lot of people, that's not really what's happening.
I think for me, more books like Patsy, only because you have that dynamic where the mother is queer and the daughter is queer/trans, or they're, so just that family dynamic. And then also Patsy herself, one of the main characters, is an immigrant that comes here. So then there's that layer of nuance to her story. but also when she does come here, she's much older and she doesn't come into her sexuality until she's much older. So I think that's something that is kind of lacking. We have a lot of coming of age stories, but I feel like, you know, there's some people that come of age into their sexuality at a much older age. So I think that more of those types of books would be great to see.
Totally. Cool. So kind of going along the same lines of the conversation that we've been having, I'm going to pull up two books that I adored, but or three books that are problematic in some ways due to the own voices kind of situation. These are the three books. I love them all.
Okay.
Deeply. So there's Red, White, and Royal Blue, The Mortalists, and The Great Believers. Each of these three deals with some different kind of aspects of LGBTQ plus culture, but none of them were written by basically gay white men, and they're all about gay white men or gay Latino men. And perhaps because of the more limited repertoire of these types of stories that are out there on kind of the big publisher kind of level, maybe that's more okay. But like, we've had a huge conversation happening the last few months having to do with own voices and Latin representation in books, for example. And the way that has been passionately discussed, I have never felt is happening within the LGBTQ plus literary community on the same level. And I think it needs to happen, not because there's anything wrong with these books or the representation in them, but it's a topic that needs to be discussed in every community, I think. Eager to hear what you think about that, and also these books in particular. And I love them.
I loved all three books that you just mentioned, Nick. Maybe not much The Immortalist, but I definitely love The Great Believers and Red, White, and Royal Blue. I think I've said this before. I'm somewhat, and I'm not minimizing the AIDS crisis from the 80s. I feel like I'm happy to see that many LGBTQ books are, not always focused on the AIDS crisis now, but using it in different ways. Like from The Great Believers especially, we look, most of these AIDS crisis books are always set in San Francisco or New York. It was kind of nice to see it set in Chicago and how it affected a whole community, from not only the folks within the gay community, but how it kind of seeped into their family and their friends, and how it kind of had a long impact on a lot of these people. So I kind of like seeing different layers of it, and I know we share this interest as well. Like the play The Inheritance, which is also a book now, it gives it another way of how millennial gays could show some respect, or at least try to live up to what happened in the 80s and try to connect the two. And I feel like there's different layers, but I kind of want to see different ways of how to tell the AIDS story.
Any other thoughts? No comment?
I guess, well, I mean, the own voices discussion that's happened over the past few months, I mean, I think one particular publication really brought that to the forefront, and I mean, I guess highlights the whole business of book publishing and how a publisher tried to do something very specific with a book that got exploded by people with big voices, with talk shows also doing it. And will something like that happen around literature about gay people also, that kind of forces the conversation? I think that's something that might need to happen before the conversation happens about it also. But Red, White, and Royal Blue, like I liked it a lot. Like I would be curious from this group recommendations for other romance, because I don't read romance, and that's why I read it. It was like, this will be fun. I don't know that I necessarily felt represented by that book, but I enjoyed it very much.
I was giggling on the metro uncontrollably. It was quite a read, salacious. Yeah. Yeah. And not even that risque. It was just like, oh my, the first son is, flirting with the Prince of England kind of thing, which is fun. I'm gonna pull up my
Mhm.
Goodreads, so talk amongst yourselves while I'm doing that.
So I didn't read The Great Believers or Red, White, and Blue, and I saw them like really hyped all over social media. Primarily, I didn't read them because I was really like, I have so many books written by own voices by queer people that I just don't have the bandwidth to be like, you know what, let me just go with the hype and pull this book into. So generally, that's how I view this, like time. Like if you have the time, pick up whatever you want, right? But for me, I'm like, give me own voices.
Yeah. One recent YA kind of nice rom-com that I read was by Phil Stamper, The Gravity of Us, which just came out this year. And Phil had been in, I think he had been scheduled to go to Old Town Books or something like that, but then Corona happened. It's a YA novel about a teenager who has this, life and plans. They were living in like Brooklyn, and then the father, who's a pilot, like in a fluke, gets selected to be an astronaut on this big mission, and then they have to move to Houston or around there, and live this like TV reality life. For a reality show that's tracking the mission, and then there turns out to be this teen romance story, which was really endearing, and one of the nice things that was definitely a marketing ploy with the book, but it resonated with me in thinking about the experience of reading it it was a book that had nothing to do with the coming out story. Like it started off with a point where all of the LGBTQ plus characters were already out, and it wasn't about that journey. It was about that being a kind of everyday part of life for everyone around them, which was a little different than I think, like if you compare it to Simon the Homo Sapiens Agenda, like that is very much a coming out story, and this felt like a next generation of YA novel compared to something like Simon a couple years ago.
I feel like that's perfect nowadays too, and that's what was lacking, I guess, when we were younger. That many teenagers nowadays could see themselves in the books and see some positive LGBTQ characters who are not ashamed or are owning up to it. And I feel like that's what was always lacking when we were growing up. It was all the books were about coming out, which was very helpful, but it was kind of nice to see, or kind of nice to read now, just to see some LGBT characters who have the attitude and could actually be positive about it. And it's not a big deal kind of thing.
Cool.
I would, on that note, I would just add, if you're looking for stories where it's not all about coming out or kind of pain and struggle, Dykes to Watch Out For, which was Alison Bechdel's original comic book series before she wrote Fun Home, is just a really wonderful weekly comic that's been compiled multiple times, and you just get to spend time with this community of mostly women identified queer people, and for those who are looking for that kind of story, I would really recommend that, particularly if you've read Alison Bechdel's other books. That's a really great one.
Cool. Another book I just want to throw out for discussion, if anyone's read it, is Mason Deaver's I Wish You All the Best, which was published last year, and it's the story of person named Ben, who comes out as non-binary and is thrown out of the house by their parents. In that experience, kind of was traumatizing, and then it goes through the journey of Ben trying to reclaim kind of confidence and stability with life, and it's really interesting to see the way that other people come out to support them, and the way that the family tries to evolve with it, but in fact inflames the conflict in some ways by not really trying to respect Ben's role in having a say in what the resolution process would be. And a book like that, which I think Kelsey, who might still be watching, is reading based on an Instagram post that I saw today. That's a kind of story that is a definite shift in my own reading interests, where I've always just kind of gone by what's the big new release of the year, which last summer I found did not lead me down the good path with everything. Like I went from really enjoying Red, White, and Royal Blue to reading another one that was like the heavily marketed gay summer destination beach read of the year, which has like a blue and a green cover and white lettering, which I will not speak the name of because I will probably have Twitter hatred from people. But it was just like the whole story was about this person's, it was a coming out story, and then it was them and their friends and their relationships, and it all revolved around this beach house where they all like did ridiculous things, and just felt like so removed from the actual experience of living that so many people have, where it's like, yes, you have privilege to be able to take off multiple weeks in the summer to go be crazy off your head in a beach house with no responsibilities in the world and not having to pay for most of it. Like, I'm glad you can tell your story, but there's so many more critical things that we should be spending our time with right now with reading, but that's just me.
I do love reading LGBTQ books that are set somewhere aside from New York and San Francisco. From The Mysteries of Pittsburgh, which is clearly set in Pittsburgh, you know, to Perks of Being a Wallflower, to the to you know, On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous. I love these books that are set somewhere else, and it allows you to understand, or even Love, Simon. You understand our LGBTQ brothers and sisters and how they're coping and how life is different in those parts of the world. And it's just not always, I'm fabulous on the Upper East Side and I'm out in Soho, or I'm out by the Castro, that there's life beyond those communities that we're all familiar with.
Totally.
What you just said made me think of this book, Under the Rainbow.
Ooh.
I don't know if anyone's heard of it. It just came out this year. It's
it
set in like a fictional small town in Kansas. And essentially this queer family, this lesbian family moves there to be part of an initiative that's to combat the homophobia in the small town. So it feels like it could be kind of heavy, but it ends up being light. And it's just kind of like a kaleidoscope of each character's life that lives in this small town. And it's one that I would totally recommend.
Awesome. I'll check it out.
Yeah.
That's very clever graphic design.
It's gorgeous.
Yeah. And then you see the little...
Oh my God.
I'm such a fan of it. I really enjoyed it too. I actually ended up kind of getting all like emotional at the end. So
yeah. Very cool. I have my pile of books over here that I'm getting through. Okay, so I'm going to be provocative again because that's what I enjoy doing. We're not going to talk about this, but we're going to talk about the sequel.
Ouch.
So, this was just like, whew, I really enjoyed this, and I know that not everyone necessarily enjoyed it. This was an odd one for me where I saw the movie first before reading the book, and typically that is something I avoid at all costs. But I was still delighted when I went back to the book that I enjoyed the book very much so on its own merit, and it had enough of a difference that
Here's the original book.
I know. Oh, yeah, and it's signed by the author, Roswell.
I know.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So the sequel, sequels, we'll not touch that topic, but I feel like with this book in particular, the people who wanted the sequel wanted more of the same, and we didn't get as much of the same, which is probably the only reason why it was tolerated as a sequel. I think he really tried to make it a new standalone thing, which I think it was. But I think the whole expectations game is a problematic thing. So eager to hear your thoughts if you read it or started to read it and gave up.
Nick knows how I feel about Find Me. I actually adored it. I think the expectations were so high because of the success of Call Me by Your Name, whether you're in love with a movie or whether you're in love with a book. Going into it, you were just you were setting itself to fail. But I actually thought he handled it. It was 3 different stories of the father and Elio and Oliver, and we kind of all knew how it was going to end. But I kind of liked the journey, how it got there. We saw Elio grow up. We left him the last time we saw him, he was 16 or 17, and the next time we saw him in Find Me, he was growing up, and he kind of had some perspective, and that came with Oliver as well, and the dad. I think what turned many people off was maybe the first 100 pages, which was all about his father, had nothing to do with Ilya and Oliver, but just what I think the dad was going through. There were some things I guess some people could relate to, especially if you're getting older. And he said several things there that would really touch a nerve in some capacity. But I loved it. And I can't wait to see the movie version. I still think, yes, they're setting themselves up to fail if they're going to expect the same magic of peaches and a beautiful villa in Italy. But I think it's Andre handled it very well. I'm a little partial, clearly. So
Yeah, wait, that's okay. You're allowed to be.
So I'm like you, Nick. I saw the movie first, and then I went and read the book. I won't say I enjoyed the movie more. I just felt more emotional watching the movie than I did the book. And I wasn't sure if that was because I was already familiar with the story at that point. And then I read the sequel, and immediately, I guess, I think within I think I got like halfway through and I was like, oh yeah, we're not getting what we want. But I wasn't disappointed. I think like you, I was like, I saw it for what it was, and I was like, okay, clearly he's trying to do something different, and this is not about, these two other characters. This is like a bigger, metaphorical like circle of parenthood and child and coming into knowing each other stuff. So I wasn't disappointed. I was like, it was good.
Cool.
Some books just really don't need a sequel, honestly.
Yeah.
I think like if they make a good attempt at it, or I'll give like authors like Becky Albertalli. She's made a whole universe out of Simon. Aside from the Simon book, there were a couple more sequels, and I think it was just announced earlier this week that she's writing a third sequel to Simon, and after she swore she was not going to. But you cater to the fans, and that's fine.
Comment from Douglas. I think that that is why I never liked Queer as Folk either, because the idea of the beautiful gay who can flock to Europe never reflected anything that I saw around me. I am from Pittsburgh, and Queer as Folk has it all wrong. In part because it was filmed in Toronto,
Sure.
so that didn't help. But Pittsburgh is an awesome city. If you haven't spent time in Pittsburgh, it is delightful and has its little pockets of adventure and wildness. Highly recommend it. Amazing contemporary art scene, unsurprisingly, really cool university community and stuff. So recommend that.
Nick, I do want to mention, I think I've been wanting to say this, for if anybody's never heard of The Art of Fielding, it's one of my favorite books too. Despite the gay character is not one of the main characters, he's a probably supporting character, but it's nice to see a sassy out gay man who's a baseball player in college and didn't care less of what people thought of him, and did what he wanted to. And he was a nice supporting role, which who was not really stereotypical of what somebody would expect from a gay roommate.
Cool.
In a college book.
Okay, since we're starting to run out of time and I'm having way more fun than our time allows, I'd love to just do a rapid fire round of us all just giving different books that we recommend to folks, and we'll just do one at a time and just keep going in circles as long as we can. I know this is a little manic, but I clearly get very excited. Oh, Take Me Out to the ball game. And Take Me Out the play, it has LGBTQ stuff in it, I think, right? I saw it a long time ago. You get easily distracted in that play from the plot, to say the least. So Lupita, what do you recommend?
The Death of Vivek OG. It's out in August. It's by Riverhead Books. I can't even tell you about it because I feel like I'm going to slip up and spoil it, but I would pick this up.
Do you mind if I cancel? If you just need a good laugh, especially during this time, by Gary Janetti. You know him as Brad Goreski's husband, and they have that whole Brad Bucks thing going on Instagram right now. If you're having fun with that, you'll definitely have fun reading his book, and we all definitely need to laugh nowadays.
I love Lupita's like, oh, where are the books? David.
Aristotle and Dante Discover the Secrets of the Universe by
love
Benjamin
that one.
Alaire-Sainz.
So good.
I don't have a copy because I listened to it with my library card, read by Lin-Manuel Miranda.
Yes.
So when I was in my community garden listening to that book, I did not blubber and cry at all. But it's a fantastic book, and I think if you're looking for some of that other stories about queer people in different parts of the country, new Americans, first generation Americans, happy gay people, like they live good lives and they're good to each other. It's a delight. I think he's writing a sequel. I will happily read that sequel.
Ooh, wow.
Yeah, me too.
Cool.
Mhm.
I'm going to defer my turn to plug two organizations real quick. 2020 is the 50th anniversary of the Rainbow Roundtable of the American Library Association, which is the LGBTQ plus professional association for the library field. And it is, in fact, the oldest LGBTQ plus professional association in the country, which is amazing and a huge credit to the fact that library and information science is ahead of many other fields in terms of moving towards better inclusion and better equity and representation. Also want to give a shout out to Query Librarians, which is another group connected in with the library world, often seen at ALA annual conferences, and the Rainbow Roundtable and also Query Librarians are really wonderful hubs and communities for folks who do this kind of work that we do all around the country, and it's really amazing to connect with them every year at conference and on Twitter and stuff. So going on to Lupita, second book rec.
Wow, no, thank you. I mean, really, anything that Samantha Irby has written is hilarious. This is her newest essay collection. She in this one, she has an essay collection called Lesbian Deathbed, and it's just like a series of like, sex is great, but like, have you? So it's just like it's like a play off that. It's so good.
Awesome, Roswell.
Mine's Morris. After we saw The Inheritance on Broadway, I was so embarrassed that I've never read that book. So I was able to get a copy, and it blows my mind that was written so long ago, and it had to be published after Forster's death. And just the way everything was handled in the book is just lovely.
Cool. Kelsey
it's on my
says,
shelf, so I can't pick it up.
my favorite LGBTQ plus sports book is the Check Please graphic novel series. Anxiously awaiting the library to get the second in the series on Overdrive. Also, the Aristotle and Dante audiobook is the best. And Heart Check Please from Elizabeth Drummond, which refers to one of the books we just mentioned. Not sure which one, but let us know and we will let everyone else know. David, you're up.
We did some good stuff about YA, but not much about little kids' books. There's a great picture book called Julian is a Mermaid by Jessica Love, which is, I mean, the art is just, we were at Trans Pride last year and my colleague put it in my hands, and it's just the most gorgeous art about a little kid, kind of non-gender conforming. I won't even identify this person, Julian, any more than that, but it's just this beautiful art about just the beauty of being a queer person and just all this fabulousness that comes out of a young person. If you need a good picture book for a little one in your life, I highly recommend it.
Cool. Okay, I have two left. Oh, which one am I going to do first? Southernmost by Silas House. Silas is a amazing human being, and he is. He and his husband Jason are friends of mine, so I'm totally biased. But regardless of that, this is an amazing book. Southernmost, a novel. This is Silas's most recent release. He has appeared a bunch in DC, and this is the story of a preacher in a Christian church in the South who experiences in their community devastating flood that wipes out a lot of people and stuff. And he comes across this person who is out in the elements and brings him into his home to give him shelter during the storm even. And that sets off this chain of events where the preacher reconsiders his faith's position on LGBTQ plus people, to the point where he has to, in order to honor his integrity, he changes his view on that publicly in the church and gets kicked out of his job. His wife kicks him out of the house, and then there's this journey of the preacher going on to kind of experience some different things to get out of that household situation, removing his child from the house because he didn't feel it was going to be a safe, tolerant environment. And then there's some other things that come along down the road, but it's a really beautiful story of the way that grace can kind of shine in places where I think the stereotype is to think that it's not possible for growth to happen. Highly recommend it. It ends up in Key West, so there's a lot of fabulous Key West scenes to enjoy at the end there. Recommend checking it out. We'll do one last round before we close here, I think, if you've got more left in you.
So we didn't get to talk about books we haven't read but we're excited about. So I'm going to do two that I haven't read yet, but I'm excited about. And so I don't know if you guys can read it. One is You Exist Too Much. And that's out in June. And then All My Mother's Lovers. And they're both queer, I've been told. And I'm just excited about the books.
Awesome.
I'm excited to read The Defiance War by the Homosexual versus the United States of America. I know it comes out in June. And I'm just the whole history of the LGBTQ history here in this country and all the things that we had to deal with. So I'm kind of looking forward to reading that. It's by Dr. Eric Serviti.
Yes. And he has quite the Instagram.
Yes.
If you want to go down that rabbit hole.
I will do a shout out. My colleague, Jonna Purcell at DC Public Library does a monthly queer book club. And the next book is called Picture Us in the Light by Kelly Loy Gilbert. And I actually don't know much about it, but I love Jonna and I will read anything that Jonna recommends. So I'm going to post how you can contact Jonna and join. It'll be a virtual book club, which we all need good stuff like that. So I'll post the information for contacting Jonna and getting in on that.
Well, thank you. I guess I'm going to close it out with my last one, and then we'll do one round of parting words for the evening. So this is my last one, and I know it's not as exciting as some of the other ones, but it's Barney Frank's memoir, and I love Barney Frank. He is a trailblazer. If you don't know who he was or is, he still is. He's the first out member of Congress. He happened to be my congressman from home when I was growing up. I got to shadow him in high school, and he's an amazing figure in American political history for his politics and the way he's navigated things. But what was really cool in this book that I appreciated was that he really gives a good lesson on how to be a change maker in a way that actually creates change that lasts. And especially here in the DC area, there can be different ways of going about that. And Barney's real message is that change is incremental and based on relationships. So you can know in your gut what the right thing is, but you have to know that there's a way to get there if you want that change to last beyond you and your fight. And this has been a very transformative person and memoir for me and my reading habits, and highly recommend it to everyone. It's pretty easy to get through. And he is a delightful human being. Cool. So any parting words? This was a lot of fun. I'm sorry that we're not all hanging out at a beer garden or something, but we'll have to do that sometime soon. Any recommendations for folks on how they can connect with you or how they should keep up on new LGBTQ plus books that are being published?
Support. My thing is just support your public library, whether it's PG County or Montgomery County, or I used to work in Baltimore City for the Pratt Libraries. I know the importance of what public libraries are doing, especially on being more thinking outside the box. And I applaud any library that does that, from special story times to having just LGBTQ book clubs.
Cool. Thank you. Any other parting words?
No, just thanks for having me, and thanks. It was so great to talk to you guys. I love seeing all your book recs.
Yeah.
I have a lot of reading to do.
I know. I'm just like, oh my God. And currently, I will plug, while we're on it, Gingerbread. Do you want to tell us about that? It has nothing to do with the topic of this event.
Honestly, I read it and I don't even know what I read. I think
yeah, I'm at that point. I'm like,
no, and Nick pulled it up because I run a book club from Solid State Books. Support your indies too, and so we're going to be meeting virtually for the first time this Sunday. So if you want to grab a copy and you're looking for a book club to join, join us. This book is interesting. I'll leave it at that.
a lot of odors implied in the narrative.
Yes.
David?
Oh, this was fun. I just appreciate it. Shout out to librarians, but also shout out to Instagrammers and influencers like you, Lupita. It's always, I never have to look further than your posts to find something interesting to read. So
yeah,
I appreciate being part of a community full of passionate readers like this. And good luck with Oyeyemi. That's for writing. It's a wild ride.
Definitely. Well, thank you all so much. I really appreciate all of the other librarians who have tuned in tonight. All of my other colleagues at Prince George's County Memorial Library System. I look forward to, in the next couple of weeks, having you all take this mantle on so that we can make this a regular discussion series. I think this is a really fun thing to do as an event, virtually or otherwise, and it's really going to be a great opportunity to get a lot of different perspectives and reading habits out into the open here, so we can hear about all of your thoughts. So sorry that I'm not like a fantasy guy or anything like that, but all reading is good reading, and except for banning books, that's not good. Oh, I didn't get to it, but like if you go check out the American Library Association's report on the top 10 banned books from the last year, 9 out of 10 titles were banned because there was LGBTQ plus content. So if you didn't realize already that things are not stable in this country right now, that is very much an indication, and important that we all continue to gather in safe spaces, and we continue to be grateful for our libraries that provide these spaces for us. So thanks all. Follow us on social at PGCMLS for Prince George's County, at lupita.reads for Lupita, at Library Congress for Roswell, and then at DC Library. Is that the handle?
For Twitter, it's at DCPL. For Instagram, it's at DC Library.
Cool. Very good. Well, thanks all. We'll see you again soon. Appreciate it. I owe you all a drink. Ciao.
Take care, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.